At 9:17 local time, the Australian P-8 Poseidon was doing just what it had been sent to do. It was flying at 21,000 feet south of the Paracels Islands on an unwavering reconnaissance route through international airspace. It was the mission of routine, the mission that can be seen but is legal, peaceful, and predictable. 2 hours later, the flight did not improve. The crew observed sensors, recorded information, and anticipated that the remainder of the sortie would be as dull as the first part. That was to be altered when radar identified a rapidly moving contact, making aggressive ascending moves. It was not an ordinary shadow or a far-off company. It was a quick, focused, and fast tune. To show its point, Beijing had scrambled in Su-35, which was one of the most advanced aircraft in its fleet. The fighter broke through the cloud cover a few seconds above the Poseidon, the twin engines running full afterburner in the process, making the Poseidon gain upon it almost as fast as sound travel. The Su-35 flew right across the nose of the P-8 and at a distance of about 600 feet. The difference between a calculated intercept and a fatal collision at their combined speed of their closure was less than half a second. The pilot turned his helmet to face the Australians, and the fighter passed in front of them. Nearly as soon as this, the wake turbulence hit the patrol plane, tossing the 190,000-pound jet at almost right angles to the left, and scrambling the autopilot as the stick shaker shook the cockpit. The pilot struggled with the controls, and both engines coughed and surged at disturbed airflow. When the plane stabilized back, the electronic support screens became illuminated all through the cabin. A X-band fire control radar was now in lock on the Poseidon, with its directed energy drilling into the plane. This was not a blanket search area. Fire control radar is accurate, small, and focused. The distinction is between flicking your flashlight over a crowd of people and pointing your laser at the forehead of an individual person. The Chinese pilot felt that this radar lock would scare off the crew. Rather, it elicited what the Australians desired, the ALQ-240 electronic support package on the Poseidon set to work at once with picking and cataloging all elements of the radar signal. Real-time capture and transmission of frequencies, pulse patterns, scan modes, and power output through encrypted satellite links were sent to Australian intelligence. This was because now, data that had taken China and Russia decades to protect was being collected without much effort. As the aircraft regained a stable condition, the Australian pilot resumed the autopilot, regained the altitude, heading, and assumed normal radio transmissions, stating that he was conducting legitimate operations in the international airspace. His voice was not strained in any way since the result was already evident. The Su-35 diverted and returned to attack again. Probably because they thought the pressure was functioning, they did not realize each second of being close made the intelligence loss heavier. On this occasion, the fighter relaxed its position on the left wing of the P-8, only 130 feet away, so close that it was equally fast at 440 knots. Close formation shadowing, as it is referred to by the professionals, played out in open view. The MX-20 HD electro-optical system mounted on the Poseidon fixed on and started recording in maximum resolution, having captured each pylon on the weapons, each panel line, and each maintenance access point. IR cameras scanned heat sources on the airframe, showing exhaust temperatures on the engines, heat in the avionics, and even hot hydraulic lines under the skin. It was found that the Su-35 was able to use thrust vectoring in order to maintain position in the turbulent air, and it did so by constantly making minor changes. It was wonderful flying, yet a very essential error. All the movements, corrections, and reactions were recorded. Then, henceforth, Australian analysts could know precisely how the plane got back on track and how such systems could be broken. The Chinese pilot felt that being close is dominating. As a matter of fact, it equated to exposure, and the contact had just started. Just 130 feet away, the peril was so evident that everybody on board the Poseidon saw it. Any abrupt action would have the length of its wingspan flying into the fighter in one motion, and the Su-35, whose thrust of over 60,000 pounds could move it in a heartbeat. The patrol plane, which would be based on an airliner structure, would only require a few seconds to start making a turn. The advantage was real, but failure to understand where the advantage lay was made by the imbalance for the Chinese pilot. He unconsciously got himself into the very position where the Poseidon sensors were most effective by lying down into that very position. The MX-20 HD cameras provided a clear picture of the fighter with its complete weaponry count. 2 R-77 air-to-radar missiles on the inboard pylons of the aeroplane, and 2 R-73 air-to-heat missiles on the wingtips. This top-secret arrangement was out of the clouds and was now documented. Time recorded and sent directly by the intelligence analysts. Nothing was guessed. Everything was confirmed. The jet aircraft swayed right and left, the global gesture to follow me. By maintaining her position when the Poseidon maneuvered, the Su-35 reacted by making a more decisive movement, flipping its vertical stabilizers and firing a jet wash at the nose of the patrol aircraft. The P-8 was shaken by the turbulence, but the maneuver gained them no more than it brought more data. Flight control responses, wake behavior, as well as correction timing were automatically logged. The Australian crew were relaxed as they knew that reaction was what the fighter desired. The Chinese pilot felt that being close to meant exerting mental pressure. What he did not understand was that each second more intelligence was being taken away. At this stage, the Poseidon already collected more usable information about the behavior of Su-35 than analysts could have accumulated in years of satellite surveillance and computer simulation. The combatant no longer was awe-inspiring. It was instructive. The Su-35 suddenly took off and 500 feet in the air above the Poseidon, then turned over. It was suspended under thrust and by computers, suspended directly overhead, with all the 42,000 pounds of it counterbalanced with gravity. Physics fought against fuel, hydraulics and weapons as the flight computer was working out equations dozens of times a second to keep the bird in the air. It was a magnificent piece of engineering and piloting prowess. It was remarkably irresponsible as well. The maneuver stretched the normal limits of aerodynamic capabilities of that speed, and it solely used the thrust vectors and not airflow. These capabilities were discussed by Australian analysts over years. They now had high-definition video evidence. All angles, corrections, and stability values were taken. The combatant then made a barrel roll about the Poseidon and followed a cylinder in the air, the patrol ship at the center. When it went across the tail, the distance was reduced to only 65 feet. Close up, that tail-mounted cameras captured lines of individual rivets down the belly of the fighter. A single wrong calculation would have plunged 21 tons of jet slicing through the empennage of the Poseidon. Rather, the maneuver was executed in the clean manner, and the sensors recorded all that. Roll rates, altitude loss, inverted flight speed bleed, and recovery dynamics had since become permanently documented. This aircraft was sold at billions by Beijing. Australia had now been teamed with a complete performance demonstration at no cost. The Su-35 bumped into the P-8 with its wake as the Su-35 rolled on the right side. The patrol plane rocked to a pitched angle of 8 degrees on the rolling vortices as they struck its control surfaces. Autopilot again disconnected. There was wild oscillation in airspeed, falling 40 knots a second. Machines in the cargo area went down, and the crews held their positions by clinging to their stations. This loss amounted to 1,800 feet before the aircraft was recovered. One of the engines lost its compressor temporarily and was re-established to combustion by the automated controls. This was a dangerous, abrupt, but managed situation. Making the Poseidon wrestle must have brought the Chinese pilot great satisfaction. What he could not know was that the satellite data connection had not ceased to transmit. All frames, all emissions, all maneuvers were already on fleet headquarters. And was not over with the fighter. When the Poseidon was stabilized by the turbulence, the tactical coordinator regained the Su-35, climbing up towards them once more after the plane had gone down. The fighter, instead of slowing down into another shadow position, hurried onwards and overtook the patrol aircraft. This was a calculated step, an indication of a change in strategy. It was no longer a matter of closeness or posing. The combatant was preparing something. The Su-35 shot up to an altitude of about 1,000 feet above the P-8 and suddenly cut off its throttles. It was reduced in half in seconds, instead of the 440 knots to less than 250. It was a sports car taking a full stop in front of a truck full of freight to the Australians. The rate of closure shot to the instant, and the distance between them had started closing at over 300 feet per second. The pilots of the Poseidon responded instantly by throwing throttles into the off position, yet turbofan engines do not react as quickly as fighter motors. The giant CFM56 engines had rotating elements which were controlled by physics and not urgency. The engines took a few seconds to spin down. The cockpit was filled with collision warnings as the gap was narrowing. The danger of a stall being in thin air was a possibility of climbing. Diving was going directly at the fighter. The risk was of cutting it off with the wings. The only solution was to reduce power, and even this hardly reduced the distance to close. The Chinese pilot did not think about the fact that now his complete deceleration profile was being documented in finer details. All the data that was recorded was engine spool down time, minimum controllable speed, throttle response, and energy loss curves. These were the very parameters that tacticians required to put a Su-35 into the energy trap in the field. He was putting his aircraft risking in an attempt to trap the Poseidon. The fighter fired its engines at the nick of the time, and instead of hitting the P-8, missed it by about 130 feet. The jet wash impacted instantly, and the superheated exhaust interfered with airflow to the engines of the Poseidon. One engine surged violently, the other floundered to the very last. Alarm lights came on, and automatic mechanisms struggled to re-establish fire. The plane was now flying at a single engine, at altitude, but serious and still survivable. Su-35 rose once more, and this time was right in front, but much nearer. There were new sensors of the Poseidon. The system of countermeasure of the fighter was armed. Flare dispensers were live. The geometry could not be confused. The Su-35 positioned itself directly ahead of the fight route of the Poseidon by positioning its engines to line over the intakes of the patrol aircraft. The intent was clear. Any flare drop would channel burning matter directly into the engines. This was the most hazardous point of the encounter, as it was to the Australians. But it was the most valuable too. One of the most tightly kept secrets among the contemporary warriors is countermeasure systems. The ability to program the missiles to fly past the decoys and remain targeting can depend on burn temperature, infrared signature, dispersion pattern, and the time to start the burn. The Chinese pilot was ready to pass away that information. The sensors automatically changed to high-speed capture, thermal bloom-optimized infrared systems, electronic meters ready to record ignition signatures. The crew awaited the impact with full knowledge that an engine failure will happen. One last warning was given by the Chinese pilot through the radio. The Poseidon did not turn. Then the flares deployed. There was a burst of 48 burning magnesium decoys under the Su-35 that burst into a wall of fire that extended dozens of feet under the sky. The Poseidon hit it full in the face. Everything was captured using sensors, temperatures, spectral profiles, dispersion geometry, timing intervals. Decades worth of information was lost in a few seconds. The aircraft was hit by particles within a short period. One engine stalled again. The other found it difficult when molten particles deformed fan blades. Airspeed dropped rapidly. The stick shaker shook incessantly with the pilots, pushing the nose down where the altitude was exchanged by speed. A mayday was made when, just as it was issued, confirmation lights indicated that all important data had been sent off successfully. A minute after, one engine brakes. The second leveled at low power. The plane was broken, rattled, and airworthy. The Su-35 flew off and was lost. Its pilot must have been tipped by the idea that the operation was a success. Poseidon returned to Darwin with a crippled limb and landed safely several hours later. Repairs would take weeks. However, the news was diffused among friends within 24 hours. Radar signatures cataloged. Mapped thrust vectoring behavior. Countermeasure systems were deciphered. Pilot behavior documented. Beijing had dispatched a fighter to deliver a message. What Australia got was a guidebook. And that was what actually happened to the encounter. You now know the facts. The only thing left is what you make out of them. Although AI and automation are reshaping the battlefield, there are still instances when it involves human composure and judgment. Do you think the pilot may always be the last judge of aerial warfare? Discuss your opinion below and subscribe to the following breakdown. Because the analysis doesn't end with this video, it begins with you.